The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult with your financial advisor. Financial abuse amongst our retirees is a growing problem in the United States. The National Center on Elder Abuse defines financial abuse as the illegal, unauthorized, or improper use of an older person's resources for monetary or personal benefit, profit, or gain, or that results in depriving an older person of rightful access to or use of benefits, resources, belongings, or assets. So what can you do to protect yourself from financial abuse in retirement? Joining me today is Lindsay Graves, founding partner and elder law attorney at the Graves Law Firm. My first question for you is, how common is elder financial abuse among your clients? Is it still a problem? Do you see it increasing?
Yes, so it is definitely, it's always been a problem my whole career. I don't know if I would say I'm seeing more of it or not because I've just always seen it pretty consistently. But what's hard about it, and I think part of the reason we do see so much is because it's everything from something small where, a child or a grandchild maybe grabs a couple bucks out of mom's purse, to things that are much more substantial. And so how pervasive it is relevant. How the scale of how much is being taken is where things are different. And I think I've seen more of an increase in some of the larger scale financial abuse that has always been there. And I don't know if, honestly, so much changed during COVID. I feel like so many people got put in such a bind at that time that it became a little bit more tempting to take advantage, especially because we had so many seniors who were in a facility where they couldn't really get out and get to their bank or things like that, where we tend to have people who are seeing them regularly who can kind of identify some of the red flags and warning signs. They weren't experiencing or encountering people in the same way to be able to notice what was going on until it was kind of too late. So I think that had an impact in how much we've seen, and like I said, sort of the scale of it.
Yeah. What are some signs of financial abuse? Maybe if you don't, just maybe for people who are listening who may not even know that this could be happening to them, or maybe that they're even doing it.
Yeah. So, the people who are most likely to notice it are definitely family members or, believe it or not, like bank tellers. I always tell my clients it's good to have a relationship with your local bank branch because they tend to notice trends in your spending, your withdrawals, your deposit habits. And so they actually are a really good front line or first line of defense at noticing things. But what we're looking for are, if you have a parent or a loved one that you're kind of helping take care of as they're aging, and they start saying things like, well, I don't know if I have enough money for that, or I don't know, where that money went. I thought I had this. It's not in my purse. Sometimes it is just dementia and they've misplaced things, but a lot of times, again, people's habits, the people that are in your life and what you're used to seeing. And so if they start to act differently around money, or especially if they start to act ashamed and they're not really sure what happened to the funds that they thought they had, or they're just really unsure, that's a good sign that something is going on, because a lot of times there's a lot of shame around that. And so when you start to see them embarrassed to talk about money, that's a good sign that something's going on that shouldn't be.
So I found this statistic from seniorliving.org that says 87.5% of elder financial abuse cases go unreported. Do you have any thoughts maybe on why that is?
Yes, absolutely. Because I would tell you that, we've all heard the horror stories of mom or dad pass away and then there's a girlfriend or a boyfriend who's trying to work their way in, or maybe a caregiver, a paid caregiver that's coming in and trying to weasel their way into the will. And that's all really fine and good for, popular culture kind of things, books and movies. But that's not most of what we see. Most of what we see is it's family members who are taking advantage. And so there's a lot of hesitancy, I think, to come forward because it necessitates calling the police on a loved one And so even if it's your child who is, who's taken a lot from you, we've seen people take a home. We've seen people take an entire retirement account, believe it or not, hundreds of thousands of dollars. You still see a reluctance of the senior in that case to report that because they don't want their loved one to get in trouble. And that's, I think, far and away the number one reason we see that. The other thing is what I just mentioned a minute ago, which is shame. As we age, I think a lot of older individuals go through a lot of loss, right? First is loss of independence, maybe loss of some of their physical abilities, some of their cognitive abilities. They do certainly lose loved ones as a spouse may pass or friends may pass away. And so the loss of the control over the money and the ability to be as sharp as they once were is really deeply shameful. And they don't want other people to know how much they're struggling. Yeah. And so that's a big part of it, I think, as well.
I feel like as you're getting older, you start kind of losing your identity a little bit and your dignity. You're relying on someone to take care of you possibly, or someone to help you with the grocery shopping or cleaning. How is this happening? Is it how do people have access? Like, how do loved ones have access to their like parents or their grandparents' funds? Is it like they were given permission on the accounts and then they kind of like they were trusted and then they started doing things they shouldn't be doing?
I think that's most of what happens. It's sort of like one of the children is the power of attorney, or maybe mom has trusted them with the debit card to go buy groceries. It is usually a source of, hey, they were given trusted access and then they take advantage. I would say that's probably the most common. We do see, even though I said it's not as typical as like a family member taking advantage, we do see sometimes people who maybe worm their way into somebody's life and influence them to start giving authority that they otherwise might not have. I think of this one family that I worked with. It was probably one of the most egregious cases I've seen, where wife passed away, husband was very lonely, and this woman started, a younger woman, right? I hate to paint that picture, but she started coming around, paying him some attention. She had been a private aide, like a nurse's aide that they had coming in to do some light housework in the home. And so she just started striking up a conversation with him, getting to know him, became a trusted person. And next thing they know, they're married. The kids know they're married. This guy married her. She puts her name on the house, right? Then she divorces him and takes the house.
Oh,
and I mean, that wasn't even enough. The worst part, Alyssa, is that she kept coming back to him even after they got divorced, saying, well, I need you to give me this and I need you to give me that. And she would just throw him a little bit of attention. And he was so lonely that he would cave and give it to her. And I think we see that, right? Because to me, and I say it all the time, loneliness is probably the biggest disease among the elderly population. Yeah. And so there are these people that know they'll take advantage. They'll prey on that and give some attention, some much needed attention, and can kind of influence people to give them access they otherwise might not have. It definitely happens in scams. We've seen a lot of scams.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was going to bring up, like the romance scams.
Yes. I cannot tell you how many people I've seen be catfished over the internet, because even, it sounds kind of unexpected maybe, but we've got a very robust dating life amongst the elderly population.
Yeah.
And so a lot of them are on dating websites and they do get catfished, and that happens more and more frequently. And not even just that, but your old-fashioned scams of somebody in another country who's sending emails, and they're getting so sophisticated now, especially with AI, that, a lot of people are getting an email that looks like it's from their bank, and they will provide information to try to clarify an issue that they think was brought to their attention by their bank, but it's actually somebody who's hacking them and trying to steal their resources. So it's almost kind of old fashioned now to say it's just your children that are taking your money, but that still happens. But we are seeing an uptick in the scams and the romance scams and all of that, of course. And that is so hard because the hackers have gotten so good. A lot of my clients I instruct them, I teach them, if you get a text message or an email or even a letter in the mail that you're not sure about, please send it to me first. I will take a look at it and let you know if it's legitimate or not, because it is truly really difficult to tell for most people.
It is, even for me. Like,
I know, me too.
I've had like emails come in. I talked about this on a previous episode, but a couple years ago, I was working for this company and I got an email from the GM that said he needed gift cards. And I was like just kind of scrolling through my email. I was multitasking. So just seeing his name, like I didn't analyze the address, but I thought this seems like kind of fishy. I don't like see him a whole lot, it's not like he's like my direct boss he was like the general manager, but not like someone I reported to. So I was like, this seems like kind of weird. And so I screenshotted it and sent it to one of my coworkers and they're like, yeah, I think this is a scam. But even then, then you kind of feel stupid. Like, I should have known better. So I kind of feel like the shame, is tied right into that.
The shame, 100%, because if you are, and I agree with you, there shouldn't be shame around this. And that's one of the things, a lot of the groups that I work with, at least where I'm located in Ohio, we have task forces that are out there trying to encourage people to talk about it and bring it into the light and not be ashamed, because it's so hard to target these people and find them out and stop them when nobody talks about it, and how we need to reframe it as it's not anything to be ashamed of. Because even people in the prime of their lives who are working and active, and anybody can fall victim to this. It's not because you're older. It's not because you're losing your sharper edge, so to speak, right? It's because they are just that good, and we need to take steps to try to stop them. And it's really, we've had people lose hundreds of thousands of dollars to stuff like that. It is really insidious.
That has to be tough on you too, to like see your clients going through this. What can you, I know if the money's gone, it's gone, but what do you do in that situation?
Well, so unfortunately, the hardest part is that a lot of law enforcement agencies have a hard time discerning what's true and what's not true, because you do have the added difficulty of ascertaining whether or not the person who's reporting it, even if they do report, right? Or even if maybe they don't report themselves, but it comes to light with a loved one and that loved one tries to report it, it can be hard to discern, well, did that really happen, or are they suffering from a dementia and they're not really sure? Yeah. And so it's a very difficult thing when you're at the point of trying to stop it. We do have like adult protective services. That's one I always tell people to call, because even if nothing's really going on, they're going to come out, they're going to investigate. And sometimes if it's something going on from a loved one, just having that enforcement officer show up and start asking questions might be enough to make them back off. So sometimes that's a good first line of defense, just to get somebody in an official role involved in asking questions. On the legal side, it's of course making sure if it's somebody who's taking advantage of a power of attorney, we need to take steps to put in place a new power of attorney, revoke that person's authority and access so that they no longer can do anything about it, or can no longer access the funds that they've been taking. So a lot of times it's putting in place a new power of attorney, or even seeking a guardianship. But on the front end, I really try to counsel my family members that I'm working with how important it is to have powers of attorney in place and with people that you truly trust to do the right thing. Unfortunately, we see a lot of people who will name their oldest child as the power of attorney just to be fair. Or, my one child is a healthcare power of attorney, so I'm going to make the other child the durable power of attorney for finances, and that way they each have a role, and that's fair. And I really harp on fairness is okay in distribution. If you're leaving the beneficiaries equally, that's fine. Right. But when you're thinking about who you're naming to trusted roles, you have to really trust the person. It has to be somebody who is suited to what you're asking them to do. And so if you have a child who has a love of money, even if you think that they're going to do the right thing, they might not be the person that you want handling your financial affairs. You want the person who's going to be level-headed and do things as similarly as you would do them for yourself, right? And unfortunately, that's a hard thing to counsel on, because when you're having that conversation with somebody who's maybe 55, 65, even 75, I think is still young for a lot of folks, they're not thinking about, hey, when I really can't do this for myself anymore, they're sitting here thinking today, well, I don't want anybody handling my money. I can manage it myself right now.
Right.
And so trying to just make sure people understand, I think education is such an important part of this, that this is a problem. It is going to happen to you eventually, that you're going to be susceptible to things, and you need to be planning now for when that time comes, that you're well situated to have the right people in the right roles to help you. And also that you have habits that those close to you are going to know when something seems off, that they can step in and help.
Yeah. So what steps can we take now in our if we're, maybe in our 50s or kind of approaching retirement, or maybe even not, maybe any age? How can we kind of safeguard our estate planning and our retirement planning from this?
Yeah. So one of the things I tell people, and again, it's kind of in that same vein, right? Of we're young, we're not ready to give over that control. And one of the interesting things about a durable power of attorney, which is a financial power of attorney, is that it is effective when signed. So that means literally if the person that you're naming has access to that document, they can take it today when you sign it and go use it to access your bank account. So I do tell family members, hey, it's an important document to have in place, because if you wait until you need it, you might not have capacity to sign one, right? And then you have to go through a guardianship. So it's important to go ahead and put it in place, but don't give it to the person that you're naming yet. Put it away somewhere safe. My preference is to tell people a fireproof safe in their home, not a safety deposit box, because they're notoriously hard to access.
Yeah.
But put it in a safe in your home. Make sure that the person that you have named knows that it's there. They know how to access it if the time comes, but they don't have access to that document now while you're still capable. So that's one thing, is just limiting current access, but setting things up for down the road that access will be available when it's needed. I think that's one thing. Also, just honestly staying on top of your statements. When you're sharp and you're able to get in the habit of knowing what you have, how things are situated, having sort of that financial literacy over your own resources. Because sometimes what happens is, maybe a spouse has passed away and they were the ones that always wrote the checks and balanced the checkbook, right? And now so the spouse that is surviving has never looked at their statements before and doesn't even know what's there. And that's a very vulnerable person, because if something goes missing, they might not even notice it.
Right.
So I think a big part of it is just taking that responsibility and that active role in your finances now and get in that habit, right? So even as you're aging, get involved. As you're aging, be used to looking at the statements, be used to keeping tabs on what's there. And that way you'll notice if something it doesn't look right to you. And even if, I'm going to use my own family as an example. Okay. My grandmother was notorious for sending me both money. She'd send me $20 when I was in college. Just go buy yourself some ice cream. That was
right.
That was her thing. But she started, as she really started aging, she would give me her credit cards and say, go buy this, go buy that. And I don't know, it was a very honest thing, and I would do that for her and follow her instructions. But she still looked at those statements when they came in. So she knew she was trusting me and giving me access, but she still kept on top of it and made sure there wasn't something showing up on her statement that was like, that didn't seem like something I authorized.
Yeah, it's just a sad situation.
It's hard. It is, it's sort of an intangible thing, right? It's hard to get your mind around. It's hard to get your hands around it and know what to do about it. And I think if we knew exactly what to do about it, we would see more progress on that front.
Yeah.
But like I said, having the population that's being taken advantage of is already a kind of has a diminished trustworthiness in terms of what their reliability is in their memory, right? And what they're able to account for. Unfortunately, I see it in medicine. I see it in law enforcement. I see it across the board in a lot of different ways that people just write off seniors as they're just older. They're confused. They don't know. And I'll be really honest. I have people that come into my office and start telling me these fantastical stories about what's happening to them. And I have a hard time ascertaining it sometimes. Right. Now, I'm a mandatory reporter. So if I suspect that there's any truth to what they're telling me, I have to contact Adult Protective Services and let them investigate. But it is really tough to tell sometimes, are you just telling me a tall tale, right? Or did this actually happen to you? And unfortunately, we don't always know, but I would err on the side, or I would tell family members, loved ones, err on the side of reporting it. And like I said, if not to the police, at least to Adult Protective Services, just to get an investigation started. They have those enforcement officers have access to more information, the ability to obtain more information than we can to make sure things really are going on as they should, and if there's any truth to the allegations.
Yeah. And I feel kind of like you were mentioning earlier with like law enforcement kind of trying to discern what's true or not. If someone is willingly like giving you their credit card, kind of like in the case of your grandma, I feel like that's like a gray area.
Scale thing, right? Think about you're a 20-something, you're struggling to get started, and grandma gives you the credit card, right, and says, go buy this thing. Mm-hmm. And while you're buying that thing, you see something else, and you're like, well, it's just one extra thing, right? It's not that big a deal. And when does that really start to become a problem, right? If they do it one time, okay. If they do it a couple times, maybe, right? But then at what point do they cross over into something now that's actionable and we really need to do something about? And grandma, if it's happening slowly like that, is she really noticing it? You know?
Right.
And that's where having those spending habits, having habits that are known that can be checked. Somebody might be able to say, hey, you know, normally you have money to go out to lunch, and I noticed you haven't gone out to lunch with us in a while. What's going on?
Yeah.
And she might be a little like ashamed to admit she doesn't have the cash in her wallet that she normally has to go out to lunch. That's where you see those red flags start to go up. And it's sort of like, okay, what's going on? Why don't you have the money you normally have?
For like blended families or widowers, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, for sure. So when there's blended families, I am a huge proponent of trust, because it gets very gray, right? Who has what rights? When do they vest? So here's a good example. If both spouses have a will that says everything goes to my spouse unless I'm the second to pass, then it goes to my children. Well, what happens when that first spouse passes is that the second spouse inherits, and then their will says everything to their children, which means that the deceased spouse's children get cut out entirely. So, you know, you have all these complicated things that can happen. Or similarly, you plan everything together for your children, somebody passes away, and then you remarry. That same scenario can play out, right? Like the new spouse and their children end up inheriting everything when the first spouse passes away. And so having a trust in place that guarantees, hey, my portion goes to my children regardless of who passes first. And if we own a home together, you know, the surviving spouse has a right to the home, but they can't be forced to sell it to pay out my kids until they pass or until a certain time has passed. Those kinds of things are really tricky to navigate. We've seen the children of a deceased spouse come in and try to start taking furniture while the surviving spouse is still living there. And that's an access thing that may be a little bit abusive to the surviving spouse. And so those are really complicated questions that I do think a trust helps lock in who has what rights and when. And that way, if there are certain accounts or assets that are not intended to go to the surviving spouse, we can lock that into a safe place so that only the children or the chosen beneficiaries have access after they pass away. And that's an important planning tool, I would say, to help ward off that kind of financial abuse.
Yeah. So in the very least, this should be like the light bulb moment of how important it is to, you know, seek professional help when you're retirement planning and planning your estate, kind of knowing exactly what documents to get in order and making sure they're drawn up in a way that protects you.
Yeah.
And reviewing that plan, I'm sure, like
reviewing that plan,
time
absolutely.
Changes. So at the end of each episode, I like to wrap up with our 2 cents, but really it's your 2 cents. So what would your 2 cents be on elder financial abuse? And maybe for like people who are, you know, as we're going into 2025, who are approaching retirement or they're saying to themselves, okay, this is the year that I'm going to start, you know, making sure I have an estate plan put together and make sure that I have the right beneficiaries and the right people in place. What advice would you give to them when it comes to kind of safeguarding from this specific unfortunate reality?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. So first thing I would say is you have to take an ownership role in your own financial plan. A lot of people put this off. They don't want to do it. It's not a fun topic, and I understand that. But take the first step. Just take the first step. Contact a professional, whether it's on the financial side or the legal side. Make sure that you've spoken to a professional saying, hey, I need to know what I need to know. And once you have that momentum going, keep it going until you have a plan in place that you feel good about, that you're invested in. And then make sure that you're checking in with everything regularly so that you know what you have and you can see if something is out of the ordinary that can be acted upon. Make sure you have a trusted team, professionals, but also family members, bank tellers, people in your life that know your habits and your routines so that when something is out of the ordinary, they can act to protect you as well. And above all, don't have any shame in any of it. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, here's where I'm at. I might not know everything that's going on, but I want to take the steps to know more. And if you're being exploited, don't be afraid to say something because we can only stop it and learn ways to help stop it when people talk about it.
All right. That does it for this edition of Not Your Father's 2 Cents. Sources used in this episode will be linked in the description. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll meet you back here next week.